Captain Vikrant Khanna, a renowned and skilled pilot known for his daring emergency landings, is introduced in the opening scene. Vikrant, who is currently in Dubai, arrives at his hotel after a successful landing and receives a call from a friend inviting him to a club. Initially, Vikrant declines the invitation, citing a flight to Kochi the following day. However, when his persistent friend persists, he gives in. When Vikrant walks into the club, he notices his friend staring at a beautiful woman who he considers to be out of his league. But Vikrant is confident that his good looks will entice her, so he makes a wager that he can get the woman's phone number. If he loses, he will buy a car for the friend, but if he wins, he will ride his favorite motorbike. The challenge begins as soon as the friend agrees. Vikrant confidently approaches the woman and entices her with smooth talk after a few rounds. Then he gets her phone number and convinces her to come to a party with him and his friend. The three then have a great time dancing all night before returning to their respective hotels in the early morning. Unfortunately, due to his excessive drinking, Vikrant misses all of his alarms and falls behind schedule. He is eventually roused by a phone call from his wife, who informs him of their daughter's upcoming birthday. However, Vikrant, who is known to have an exceptional memory, assures her that he is well aware of the date. As the departure time approaches, Vikrant hastily prepares himself and rushes to the airport, hiding his tired eyes behind sunglasses. He meets his co-pilot, Tanya Albuquerque, upon arrival, and they briefly discuss their upcoming flight. They then exchange small talk before boarding the Skyline 777. When everyone has arrived, Vikrant addresses the passengers, informing them of the flight's expected duration, the distance to their destination, and the current weather conditions. It's almost like any other normal flight, and everyone appears to be in good spirits. However, once the plane is in the air and at a safe altitude, Vikrant activates the autopilot mode and goes to sleep. Tanya struggles to identify the cause of an engine alarm that begins to beep after a short period of time. Fortunately, Vikrant awakens and quickly resolves the problem with his razor-sharp wit. He then summons a flight attendant and requests a cup of black coffee, claiming that he is still drowsy. He also whispers the name of a particular medication, which she recognizes and prepares for him. When Vikrant finally gets his coffee, he goes to the loo for a few moments. He soon returns to the cockpit and has a brief conversation with his co-pilot. As time passes, it begins to rain heavily, with lightning and thunder strikes. The pilots check the fuel meter and discover that the plane still has 4,800 kilograms of fuel. Furthermore, they estimate that it will take them 45 minutes to reach Kochi. Meanwhile, at the Kochi Air Traffic Control Office, there is an elderly employee named Mr. Tripathi who continues to work despite his failing health. Tanya contacts Kochi ATC to request permission to land as the flight approaches its destination. Mr. Tripathi, on the other hand, informs her that the heavy rain has significantly reduced visibility on the runway, resulting in a negative response. Tanya speaks with Vikrant about whether they should continue with the flight or attempt the landing after hearing this. She also informs him that their fuel stocks are depleting by the second. But, much to her astonishment, Vikrant insists on continuing with the landing despite the poor visibility. Tanya then transmits this message to ATC, informing them of the dire fuel condition. As a result, Mr. Tripathi eventually agrees to let them land on runway 27. The landing is only a few minutes away, but the rain has become even more intense. Unfortunately, this causes the aircraft to lose contact with ATC, causing them to abort the landing and fly again. Tanya, concerned, suggests to Vikrant that they consider landing in Bengaluru as a highly secure option in the following scene. She calculates that they will need 3,300 kilograms of fuel to get there, but they still have 3,900 kilograms left. Vikrant, on the other hand, believes they should return to their original destination. He then contacts the Kochi ATC to request landing permission, which Mr. Tripathi grants. Unfortunately, the foul weather has obscured their view of the runway once more. With time running out and people beginning to panic, Vikrant quickly changes the flight route to the nearby city of Trivandrum. The plan is to arrive as soon as possible. However, unbeknownst to him, Trivandrum ATC is busy informing other airports that any flights bound for them will be denied due to an impending storm. Mr. Tripathi's health begins to deteriorate at the same time, and he is replaced by another member of staff. This employee is completely unaware of the critical emergency information received from Trivandrum. People awaiting the arrival of their loved ones, on the other hand, are becoming increasingly anxious as word of the flight diversion spreads. The situation is even worse on board Flight 777. The passengers have grown restless and are bombarding the flight attendants with questions. One of the passengers on board is an aviation journalist who suspects something is wrong. When he tells the others about it, they begin to panic and scream. The situation quickly escalates, and Vikrant is forced to exit his cockpit and assume command. With a calm voice, he encourages the passengers to work together, saying that they all have the same goal of arriving safely at their destination. Meanwhile, staff at Trivandrum ATC are unconcerned, assuming that no flights will land until further notice. To their surprise, they receive a landing permit from Tanya, who is on board Flight 777. The staff is nervously questioning her about whether or not they received the Kochi ATC storm emergency notification. They go on to say that the visibility on the Trivandrum runway is significantly worse than on the Kochi runway, implying that landing is impossible. They suggest Bengaluru as an alternative landing location, but Vikrant informs them that no emergency notifications were received. He also warns them that their fuel is critically low. Tanya, who is inexperienced, begins to scream when she overhears their conversation, but Vikrant manages to keep her calm. The turbulence intensifies as the plane approaches the runway, causing both passengers and flight attendants to panic. This finally convinces Trivandrum ATC that it's now or never, and the aircraft is granted permission to land on runway 16. Vikrant slowly brings the plane down and tries to touch down on the runway, but the wheels lose traction, forcing him to abort the landing and ascend once more. Following that, he informs ATC that they will attempt another landing, this time on runway 34. When ATC officials hear this, they become concerned and question the pilot's decision, revealing that the wind direction on runway 34 is horribly unsuitable for landing. They expect the plane's tail to be ripped off, but Vikrant refuses to budge. With the fuel running low, he must take matters into his own hands. After mentally preparing himself, Vikrant instructs the passengers to hold on tight as they prepare for an emergency landing. He then shockingly closes his eyes and glides the plane as safely as possible to the ground. The plane eventually touches down and begins to skid. It nearly reaches the end of the runway before coming to a stop just in time. Despite the extreme circumstances, Vikrant miraculously managed to land the plane safely. The complications, however, do not stop there. In fact, they have only recently begun. Due to their extremely risky landing, Vikrant and Tanya are being investigated by the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, or DGCA. The DGCA thoroughly investigates all aspects of the flight, including the Mayday distress signal issued prior to landing. Following the investigation, DGCA officials reported that one of the passengers, an elderly woman, died as a result of a heart attack. Following that, the findings of the investigation are forwarded to Narayan Vedant, the strict head of the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, AIB. He will now be in charge of locating and punishing the perpetrators. Meanwhile, Vikrant struggles with guilt over the death of the elderly woman. He believes he could have done a lot more to assist his passengers. Vikrant then receives a distressing call from the deceased woman's daughter, who accuses him of murder. She says that people like him should never be allowed to fly planes. After the call, Vikrant returns home in tears, where his wife attempts to console him by reminding him that if he had not been the pilot, the incident could have been far worse. Meanwhile, Narayan and his investigation team examine the black box and gather all relevant information in order to apprehend the culprit. Later, Vikrant receives a summons from the AIB for the investigation that will take place the following week. Then he receives a phone call from Narayan, who instructs him to prepare for the upcoming proceedings. However, Vikrant responds calmly that he has nothing to prepare for because he has nothing to hide. Nishant, the director of Skyline Airways, is introduced in the following. He appears to be pleased with the significant increase in his company's share price as a result of the previous incident. His expression quickly changes when he learns that Narayan will be in charge of the investigation. According to Nishant, Narayan conducts his investigation in such a way that the accused has no chance of escaping. Among these events, the plane crash receives extensive coverage on television. Opinions differ, with some blaming the pilots for the woman's death and others praising their decision as the best possible under the circumstances. The scene then shifts to Vikrant and Tanya's first trial, which is a high-profile case. Narayan claims that the captain was exhausted from a week of non-stop flights when he took command of the flight. He explains that pilot errors are frequently caused by homesickness. However, Vikrant defends himself by drawing a parallel with soldiers who faithfully perform their duties despite being separated from their families for extended periods of time. Narayan then hands Vikrant a bottle of Disprin, a medication only available to cabin crew and pilots. He suspects Vikrant ingested the drug and uses a lie detector machine to prove his point. Surprisingly, the captain passes Narayan's questioning without incident, resulting in the first trial being adjourned. Later that day, the Skyline Company holds a meeting in which Nishant and other higher-ups advise Vikrant to remain silent during the trial in order to protect the company's reputation. The captain, however, refuses to comply, prompting Nishant to threaten him with blacklisting from the entire aviation industry. He also gives Tanya the same warning before storming out of the building. Tanya is subjected to a series of questions during the second trial, leaving her struggling to choose her words carefully. Under duress, she reveals that the captain had red eyes prior to the flight and had napped shortly after takeoff. Furthermore, she reveals their disagreement over an alternative landing location. When Vikrant claims to have gotten enough rest before the flight, Narayan unexpectedly shows up with the woman from the Dubai club. She reveals that they had been drinking and partying until 6 a.m. The captain does not dispute her account and explains that he was able to sleep throughout the day. He emphasizes that the flight rules require pilots to abstain from alcohol for 12 hours before flying, and the time difference between the end of the party and the plane's takeoff was approximately 15 hours, proving that he did not violate the rules. Unwilling to give up, Narayan recounts Vikrant's mistakes from that day, including hovering over Kochi for 33 minutes and fueling the plane at less than full capacity. In response, the captain emphasizes that pilots are rule followers rather than rule makers, and that no responsible pilot would jeopardize the lives of their passengers. Narayan then turns his focus to Tanya, who inadvertently reveals the startling fact that Vikrant landed the plane with his eyes closed. This provides Narayan with an excellent opportunity to highlight the captain's carelessness. Furthermore, he brings up the issue of selecting the incorrect runway. With these points raised, the second trial concludes without Vikrant's defense. When he returns home, he takes his wife to the house of the deceased passenger's daughter. Despite his current bad mood, Vikrant expresses his heartfelt condolences for the loss of his daughter. The third trial is set to begin the following day. Vikrant explains just before the verdict is read that he has a photographic memory of runway 34 due to his landing experience there. To validate his claim, he requests a flight simulator reenactment of the flight. The judge agrees, and in the following scene, we see Vikrant take control of the plane while wearing a blindfold over his eyes. Narayan is also in the co-pilot seat, as he wants to thoroughly inspect everything. To his surprise, the blindfolded Vikrant lands the plane without breaking a sweat. Finally, the judge rules, and Mr. Tripathi is fired for failing to relay emergency information, and Vikrant and Tanya's pilot licenses are suspended for a period of 3 months only. In addition, the AAIB announces a thorough investigation into Skyline Airways. The action then shifts to 3 months later, when Vikrant resumes flying. At the airport, a Skyline flight attendant approaches him and admits that she was the one who had consumed the Disprin out of fear. She admits that she had wanted to confess sooner, but she was afraid of losing her job as a single mother. Vikrant understands her predicament and reassures her, telling her not to worry. With this, he continues on his way, and the film concludes.